Good day. In this magisterial lecture, I will be presenting to you my philosophical paper, Insight as Activity, Nature of Knowing, using the lens of Bernard Lonergan's book entitled Insight, a Study of Human Understanding. By the way, I am Ivan Manlangat, and the philosophical question I will be confronting is that, how do we actually know? To this, I have argued that knowing involves engaged insight, a dynamic and individual process of discovery, not passive consumption of facts. In other words, knowing requires activity of the mind and the body, and not merely a passive knower. To justify this, here are my three main points. Insight is an active and transformative process. Second, knowledge has to go through personal questioning and reflection. And my last point is that authentic understanding brings about responsibility and authenticity in action. To elaborate on the points presented, first, insight is an active and transformative process. In other words, insight is not an event, but a process that happens to our understanding and transforms it. For Lonergan, insight is a functional of the intelligent and reasonable subject who asks questions and seeks answers. For the second point, knowledge has to go through personal questioning and reflection. This means that authentic knowledge entails questioning and critical examination instead of mere acceptance of what is known in the surface level. For Lonergan, he highlighted that the significance of self-appropriation, that is the process of being conscious of one's own thought patterns, as essential and comprehending. And for the last point, authentic understanding brings about responsibility and authenticity in action. That is, genuine understanding results in responsible action and authenticity. For Lonergan, insight is not final unless it shapes one's choices in lifestyle. However, other scholars, in their distinct works, have argued that knowledge can arise without deep reflection, how insight can be unpredictable, and how our understanding does not always translate into moral behavior. For my first objection, insight can be sometimes misleading. This means that the feeling of having an aha moments can be misleading and results in overconfidence in poor solutions. This is because even when people get wrong conclusions, they can sometimes have this overwhelming sense of certainty. For my second objection, insight can be accessed through sense experience. For John Locke, knowledge came mostly from sensory experience rather than reflection. Based on this comprehension, people can learn by seeing the outside world without needing to engage in-depth introspection. For the third objection, moral truth does not always equate to active morality. Though they can demonstrate what is correct, insight and intuition cannot guarantee that individuals will behave in that manner. With the objection presented, I will be confronting them with the guidance of some scholars, claiming that there is a need for critical evaluation, awareness of the insight grasp, and the moral obligation that is necessary to apply in human action. First answer, the need for critical evaluation. Insight must be followed by reflective judgment. It is not complete until the subject verifies its truth through rational questioning. The reliability of insight, therefore, depends not on the initial feeling, but on the reflective process that follows. Second answer, the awareness of the insight is grasped. This means that the true understanding arises when individuals appropriate their own thinking, when they become aware of how they know. Knowledge that is only sensory remains superficial, and it is interpreted and integrated through self-reflection. For my third answer of the objection, the moral obligation that is necessary to apply in human action. For Lonergan, authentic insight does not end in knowing alone. It leads to moral obligation and action. Ethical understanding must be appropriated in a way that transforms one's choices. Hence, the nature of knowing, as argued through Lonergan's philosophy, is not a passive reception of facts, but an active, reflective, and ethical process. Insight must be cultivated through personal questioning, critical judgment, and moral engagement. And that would be all for my magisterial lecture.